Well, Robert H. Butler is with us here now on Shout Radio, and we're going to talk about his Who Endures series, and he's got his coffee all ready, haven't you?
I do.
So the Who Endures series, how would you describe it?
I would say it's kind of a villain story, Rise of a Dark Empress sort of thing. One of my readers compared it to watching the rise of a Sith Lord, which I have to say, as a Star Wars fan, I kind of like that analogy.
Yeah. Where did the idea come from for it?
A couple of years ago, I was working as a trainer out at Fort Bliss, and I was only having to work about 20 hours a week. And I was watching a series and reading the novels of an animated series called Overlord. And war stories just didn't seem to exist for that one. I mean, the novels were well written, the story was very good, but it seemed to beg for a war story, and nobody was writing one. And then one day somebody started one that seemed to promise a really good story. And then I guess they got intimidated by the idea of writing a full-blown war, and they gave up. And I was so disappointed by the fact that they gave up that I started writing my own.
Is it quite hard to write a war story? I mean, how did you find it?
I started writing it and almost kind of for fun. I had 20 hours a week of work, which was fine. And so, sometimes you have to read the story you want to write. To read the story you want, you have to write it yourself. And so I did, and it started getting popular within the fandom, and it started getting more and more and more popular. And I introduced a character named Nua Kellen Iwadel, meant to be kind of very minor, very small, not a big role, but something about her clicked with the reader base for this particular fan fiction. And what ended up happening was they were so worried that she would die that some of the readers started doing something called, or what they called, the Save Nua campaign, Save Nua 2019, and started sending me fan art of the character. And at that point, I couldn't kill her. I continued to expand the war concept. I borrow heavily from history. So characters that I write are often based off of real people.
Wow.
For example, the main character in that story was based off of a combination of Attila the Hun, Joan of Arc, Cesare Borgia, and other major historical figures to create someone who was powerful, charismatic, and slightly unhinged.
And when you're basing these characters off people from history, where do you look and when do you look? Is it specific countries and specific eras, or could it be from anywhere?
Anywhere. The whole world, it belongs to a writer to plunder. I will steal concepts from anything and everywhere for inspiration. Every writer is kind of a thief in a way. Whether you mean Tolkien or George R. R. Martin or David Eddings, every great author borrows from the past. They all do it, myself included. And why not? You stand on the shoulders of giants, and every culture is kind of a gift to the rest of the world. So you get to create something new, to break it down and to convey new messages and new concepts. In the war story that I wrote for Overlord, the theme of PTSD suffering and recovery after trauma ran throughout most of it. In the Who Endures series, as that minor character that has now become a main character, one of the recurring themes is responsibility for herself and the people who come under her care and under her command, going from somebody who's villainous and indifferent to someone who's villainous and well-intentioned.
Yeah. When you get inspiration from history, do you think that makes it more believable and realistic? Because, of course, these things happened. It's not made up from your head.
Yeah, I think it does. I think it makes things very realistic to draw from things that are themselves very real. And it offers a chance to kind of explore the driving forces in history itself and the driving forces of mankind. Even the worst of villains were more than one thing. You could have somebody who was like Alexander the Great, who was a conqueror and did a lot of terrible things, but he also had noble goals and aspirations of uniting peoples and everything else. There was a movie about him that portrayed that very well. They had a line in there that always stuck with me. It says, "We must kill the dreamers or they will destroy us," or something like that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think sometimes, I don't know about about in America, but sometimes we look back on kings and stuff, and the stuff that they did is pretty horrible, but we sort of think of them as big, important people from our history that should be celebrated.
Yeah. Most of history is filled with villain stories in one form or fashion. Even the ones that we admire in the context of their time, we would consider them to be criminals or war criminals today. I don't think we should idealize the past too much. History is there for us to learn from, and in case of artists and writers and the like, to draw from. You don't have to write something that's purely heroic or purely villainous. You can create a character or a story where even if you think someone is a villain, their motivations and their drives and ambitions make sense. In the Who Adores series, for example, the main character, the goal she starts with is all she wants to do is conquer an empire for herself, to trade it over to the empire that she came from, that rose up after this terrible war. And in exchange for giving over an empire to the god that rules that empire, she would get one person resurrected. That is her attempt at a gift. But as she starts to care about the country that she's in and become assimilated and starting to think of it as home, she starts to look at her old home in a different light. She starts to see it as a threat. So the novel goes from one dark empress's selfish ambition to one dark empress' ambition to protect her people and her home from the destruction that will inevitably come their way if she's not prepared to meet her homeland on equal terms.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier there was one character who you didn't end up killing off because there was whole petitions and everything about it. Do you generally go for what your fans want and are thinking, or do you mostly like to write what you think works best?
I'll go with what works best, but if you interview a lot of writers, if you deal with a lot, something occurs called character rebellion on occasion, where no matter how you write something, it won't work. And it will feel like the character wants to do something different. And then the only way to make the story work is to do what it seems like the character really wants to do. It happens a lot. And this particular character, honestly, if the death would have made the story better, then I probably would have gone for it. But because the character had changed so much in the short time that she'd been on scene and on screen, I just couldn't picture the character dying the way that I had originally thought they might. And they just kind of phoenixed themselves back to life, you might say.
Yeah. At what point do you realise you've perhaps written the wrong thing about the character? I mean, does it immediately feel wrong, or is it somewhere down the line?
It's usually pretty immediate. Like, this doesn't feel right. This character wouldn't say this. This character wouldn't do this. It's hard not to listen to them. There was a movie made a couple of years ago about Charles Dickens writing I think it was called A Christmas Carol, with Tiny Tim and
Scrooge.
Ebenezer Scrooge. I forget the name now, but the movie was about how the characters that he created sometimes seemed more real to him than the people that he knew. And so they would throughout the movie, the characters would be talking to him like they were right there. And that is what it kind of feels like when you get really into a story.
A lot of people say that they feel like a book is writing itself, and they're just basically being a medium, actually physically putting the pen to paper, as it were. Would you go as far as to say that, or do you still have a say in what ends up in the book?
Stories seem to evolve sometimes. Like, I will have a specific end in mind, and I will know almost down to the last word what the ending will be. And then sometimes things go differently. Usually what happens is the main character will get the end I intend, but then the side characters have become something different, and they go on their own journey. In the Who Endures series, there is a character named Sato. All right, he's the prince of a city called Comestra. And Comestra is essentially a version of ancient Sparta. Really just a militaristic society, not a large population, but the most dangerous people on the battlefield. And he was an idealist. He was a dreamer. He thought his people were invincible. He thought he was invincible. He made some bad decisions, and the whole city ends up collapsing. I thought his story arc was going to be very short. He was going to end up giving the main character some legitimacy and then dying off. but instead he became something very different. He didn't follow the path I originally laid out for him. And now he's, I guess you could say, very a person much more at peace with their responsibilities, their failures, and he's still growing. He's in a new novel now that I'm working on, Who Endures Conflicted Duty, which I'm about 10, 11 chapters into right now, which bridges the gap between the sixth and ninth book, a bunch of events about him taking over a whole new city and assisting somebody else.
That sounds exciting. How has it been interacting with your fans? Because, of course, we've mentioned that petition earlier, but what else is the reaction like?
I mean, honestly, I love it. I know there are people who write books who want to remain aloof and distant, but I like being able to interact with readers. I like people. People are interesting. Even people you don't like can have a story to tell. And I love seeing the impact on people's lives. Like when I ended that fan fiction that I wrote, it was 216 chapters, give or take, and over 1,046,000 words. It took a solid year to write. And then when I wrote the final words in that story, I had people leaving messages, writing to me on that platform and leaving reviews, telling me how much they cried, how much they loved it. And it was, how much the story meant to them after all that time. And that meant a lot to me. I like seeing the impact of my work on the people who read it. And it's hugely motivational to me to be able to interact with people who like my stuff. I mean, I live with it when people don't. Not everybody's going to like that. That's fine. But when people really connect with a character, when it helps them, see something new about themselves. Like one guy wrote to me and said he saw the signs of PTSD in that character and recognized the same symptoms in an uncle who had been behaving, kind of unhinged, very much like that character did in their certain moments. And they're like, wow, I think my uncle may have PTSD, and they were going to try and get him some help. You can have huge impacts on people through fiction. It's sometimes easier to connect with fictional characters than it is with real people, precisely because we see everything about their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions. They don't judge us, and they don't reject anyone who reads them. Every character will be as open with the next person as they are with whoever you are. No character will ever care. All that matters is that you get something from the story. And interacting with readers and fans lets me see just what that is. And it's a great way to learn, too. I learn a lot by seeing what works and what doesn't, by directly talking to my reader base.
Yeah, and that's interesting about the PTSD there. Did you have to do a lot of research to find out what the signs of PTSD are and put them in the character, or do you know that anyway?
I already know a lot of that. Like I said, I've been in the military for many years. I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I was around a lot of different soldiers, some of whom had, shall we say, unpleasant experiences and had some of those symptoms themselves. And PTSD, signs and symptoms, is something that everybody is kind of taught to be aware of. And it's been a thing for years in the American military to push for awareness of these things so that people can get the help that they need.
And what else are you working on? You've mentioned another book that you're about 11 chapters into, right? Oh,
yes. I work on multiple books at once. I've got 3 going right now. There's Who Endures Conflicted Duty. There's Ghost in the Cloud, which is based off of the Lambda case. I don't know if you know about that.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, the Lambda case was the Google chatbot that an engineer insisted had gained sentience.
Yeah, I know the word lambda because it's something to do with a wavelength.
Yeah, there's a chatbot that a Google engineer says has attained sentience. He's lost his job. He's been suspended from work and everything. But he's absolutely convinced that this bot that they created is self-aware. Now, I haven't made up my mind on that. I have my doubts, of course. But the concept is such an interesting one that I downloaded all of the transcripts and everything that I could find to read through it, and started reading philosophy of mind and things off of like the Stanford Encyclopedia to to learn more about, free will and sentience, and to create a new narrative, a new novel about something like that, and where the reader will have to decide for themselves where the AI is sentient or not by the end of the novel. I don't know if I would call it sci-fi or not. I guess it kind of depends on whether or not what you think of it at the end.
Yeah.
But I'm also working on one called Adopted by Humans, Volume 2, which is a soft science fiction about an alien anthropologist and his life on Earth. It's very much a found family kind of story. As my daughter would put it, wholesome 100.
Sounds great. Well, in the meantime, where are we able to find your whole book series and other books in the meantime?
You can find them on Amazon. They're all up there that are released right now. I have another 6 finished novels that I haven't uploaded yet, mostly because I don't have the cover art prepared for it yet, and I have to go through and finish the editing, which is always an ongoing trial. But if somebody goes in and looks up Adopted by Humans, or How Misunderstandings Made a Demon Lord, or Who Endures, Strange Lands, which is the title of the first one. It's up to the 5th right now. Yeah, they'll find them pretty easily. In fact, the How Misunderstandings Made a Demon Lord made it to number 19, I think it was, in dark fantasy horror.
Yeah. Well, many thanks for coming on today. It's been great to talk to you.
All right. Well, it's been a real pleasure, and I hope to do this again sometime.